which means you don't have a lot of money to spend on players. You're not the New York Yankees or Boston Red Sox. Or you're not even the Louisville Bats. Right? That's the name of the minor league team, isn't it? Yeah. I got an orange Louisville Bat hat at home somewhere. Could have worn it today. What they discovered was by looking at data, this is the Oakland Athletics back in the 80s, by looking at data, they could find players that nobody else wanted, but were better than average. In fact, they did things better than most other Major League Baseball players did. And they found this out by looking at numbers. I won't go into detail unless you force me, but that's the story of the book. It turned Major League Baseball on its ear in terms of how you find and develop talent. That's the key point for us. By looking at numbers in ways that nobody else, we were using the old stories in our head about what makes for a good baseball player. Guys who could run well, you know, looked like they could throw well. They just looked good. Kind of like I used to, Bob. Well, and the point of this is, with this low payroll, they were going to the playoffs almost every year for a period of time. Now, you say, Professor Koo, I don't remember seeing the Oakland Athletics in the playoffs recently. What's happened? All the other teams figured out what the Athletics were doing, and now it's a so-called level playing field. Every Major League Baseball team has a bunch of number crunchers, so where are the IE people in the room, right? We need more from you. You need more work, right? You're a lonely person. We've got to ask better questions, probably need better data, but we got more data in some instances than we need. Check the DWF rate. Staring you in the face, but we don't, it's too bright. Every national NBA team, all right, get going, Koo. The world of professional sports was turned, not topsy-turvy, but, so we know from studies, here's another great book, Student Success in College. Put that on your shopping list. We now have economists running data, and we had run earlier, showing that it's not how affluent the institution is. So if you go back and you're whining again, oh, well, those were good ideas, but we can't do any of that because they're so costly. Actually, that might be true. You can't do everything. But we know if you're betting on student success and you want a return on investment, the way the state, your governing board, the parents of your, it's not how much, it's where you put the dollars. We had Jane Wellman do a study. She's one of these great economists, you know, and she did a paper for one of my projects, and we don't have enough data really to draw firm conclusions about what kind of investments produce what levels of learning, but there are some things we can say. And what we can say is, if you're going to a budget hearing, you ought to have a pretty persuasive rationale that is either data-driven or theory-based about why you're doing what you're doing, and horror of horrors, that probably ought to be so for refunding what you're currently doing. See, I can say this and leave. But just the exercise of asking ourselves, where are the data to support this approach contrasted with something else we might do here, right? More to be said about that, I guess. Putting money where it will make a difference. And where does the money come from? Notice my soft language here. We would sunset programs that are not presently delivering the goods. This is another data-driven piece of our work. It's a really scary thing to contemplate. Most of us are personally or know somebody who's invested in that thing that is touching so few students that it's really hard to justify. I mean, there may be justifications, but there are targets of opportunity. No place does this easily or well. All right, last point here. Imagine, not the last one, the fourth out of 5, imagine what your institution, what the feel on campus would be, what the student experience would be if every student did some form of high-impact activity in the first year. It doesn't have to be the same. You know, you could have a bunch of students doing learning communities. You could have, these are social science terms, another bunch doing a first-year seminar. You might even bite the bullet and say everybody ought to do an inquiry or writing-intensive first-year seminar, and then we would, to capture the power of the peer influence, we'd add a peer preceptor to the instructional team, you know, a junior or senior, all enthused about the course, helps plan it, can look his or her buddy in the eye who's in the course and say, I know why your paper sucks. You didn't spend any time on it. That kind of message cannot be delivered with the same poignancy and impact as an instructor writing in the margin, right? This is doable. Of course, we can't do it overnight. We'd have to scale it up. There are lots of different areas. And we don't know. I'm guessing that most of us don't know right now how many students are doing something akin to this. But if we accept the data, quickly here, this is Cal State University at Northridge. Gotta go fast. Cal State University Northridge in the Cal State University system. You may not be able to read the numbers in the back. Again, apologies for that, but they did some backward tracking and looked at the graduation rates by students who had done a high-impact activity. One of the 10 I showed you, right? One of the 10. And they broke it out by 2 groups. Cal State Northridge is a Hispanic-serving institution, so they were very interested in how their Latinos were faring in terms of graduation rates. These are 6-year graduation rates. If you have not done one, 38% of the students who didn't do one finished in 6 years. If you did one, the number is almost half, 49%. If you did 2, the graduation rate is now up to 2/3, which of course is beating the national average by a pretty wide margin, and if you adjust for entering student ability, very few people did 3 or more. Do you see the pattern here? I'm attributing causality, of course, as only a plenary speaker can do with enthusiasm. But there are other murmurings inside the Cal State University system showing very similar results, so much so that the all CSU, what is it, 23 campuses, something like that, system, faculty senate, is trying to figure out whether it is possible to require a first-year high-impact practice as part of general education. They haven't figured it out yet, and they may not get there. But the data are so powerful inside the CSU system, and they have very similar pressures like we all have, right? This chart simply says employers love this stuff. Trust me. Demonstrated competence in a field-based activity. Hello, is that the internship we're talking about here? That you can actually do stuff productively with what you learned in college? That's what that chart is showing. Finally, mercifully, almost every undergraduate student works. Not as many in the first year, but by the senior year, 85% of your students have or are working. Most of that 85 are working. We know the old saw about working on campus. Students who work on campus are more likely to graduate than students who work off campus. And that's good. And then we think about, well, why might that be? And what if we actually thought that we could manufacture the work experience and turn it into something akin to be a high-impact practice? What would it require to do that? First thing it would require is we would have to take work seriously. we'd have to disabuse ourselves, me included, of the notion that this job this poor student has to perform to pay her car insurance and buy all these electrical components and live in this nice apartment and buy the clothes she's wearing and all these shoes, all the things that are irrelevant to her studies, but she has to do them. Never mind. Come on, stay with me here. I'm having a little joke on you. I want to, in the follow-up session, talk more about how to make work a high-impact activity. There are some very positive experiments going. I mean, I think these things have been going on forever around the country, and here's just a teaser. You do it by intentionally bringing, you're going to be sick of this, reflection and integration and application into the conversations with students who are working in your office. And when we do this from the faculty side of it, it is about redesigning assignments. It's kind of borrowing that service learning model in a way. I want to show you some data a little bit later after lunch about places. This, by the way, is the information desk at the University of Iowa campus student union. And I'm going to show you some data from Iowa in the follow-up session as to the great experiment they have underway. I've come to realize that when you get to the end of a session like this, the best way to conclude is with something that nobody can challenge. And that's why I've drawn here on Aristotle, because I hope there's nobody in the room who actually knows this work and knows whether he said this or not. But there's a lot of John Dewey in this, or maybe John Dewey spent a lot of time reading Aristotle, right? But a lot of the things that I've mentioned, perhaps, or some of them anyway, if they're not foreign to us as a collective, we don't have a lot of experience doing them. And when people like us get to where we are, because we've studied more and we've learned more and we got more degrees than most other people, we get into the habit of thinking that we actually know pretty much all there is to know. And there's probably some things that we could experiment with under the right conditions that would improve the lot of the potential success of our students. Forget about that. Well, except maybe, I've mentioned all those things, but just this last one, some of the organizational theorists I follow remind me, and I'm reminding you, that whenever you start something new and you get that first, second trial, there's this almost predictable, what they call implementation dip. That is, it seems to be going well, and then, all of a sudden, there's this backsliding pratfall, and that's the time to redouble efforts, not to say, I knew it wasn't good, not to listen to the bluebirds, I knew it wasn't going to work, right? Let me close, not repeating this mantra, but let me just take this last minute and provide an autobiographical ending. So it's 1967. I know some of you weren't around then, and it's homecoming week at my alma mater, and I'm the president of my social fraternity, and I'm supposed to be writing a senior paper, which is I didn't know it was a culminating experience, but that's what it was. And I literally physically bump into my advisor on the ground floor of Old Main, which is one of the main classroom buildings. Literally bumped into him, and of course, Professor Bali, oh, George, how are you? And how's that paper coming, I mean, it's like Thursday, and we got a float to build, and, goofy stuff to do, and I said, great. He said, I've been thinking about you, or something to that effect. He said, I think you should really inquire about the GRE. I thought, I can't afford a new Pontiac. I don't know what this guy's talking about. GRE. And I've heard good things about the MAT, which was another, this was, if you were around in those days, a few of you were, this was a new Master of Arts in Teaching. He's saying to me, I was going to be a high school teacher, and coach, first gen student, you had like 3 role models and 2 of them were teachers and coaches. And yeah, MAT, which means he wanted me to think about teaching maybe in college. Holy crap, right? So things happen. I get really good at the GRE. You take it 3 times, you get better. Yeah, they say you don't, but take it seriously, you can get better. And so the rest is kind of history. Anyway, so I'm with Professor Bali in a robing ceremony back at my alma mater, 15 years ago or something like that, chatting him up, and he's shorter than I am, he's looking up at me, and then I recount this transformative exchange. It probably didn't last 30 seconds, right? Go through it, and I said expectantly, do you remember? No, I don't remember. Yeah, of course, I can't say I was devastated, but I was a little surprised, because, it's all about me, right? And of course, it wasn't too many hours later where, it struck me that this guy has probably had hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with his students that opened a door that me didn't even know existed, and said, you should walk through that door, right? Putting me on a trajectory that I could never have imagined myself. So if there's a lesson here for all of us, it is always to err toward the promise that the individual student has to see things that the student, him or herself, can't see, to set yet another level of expectation for that person's performance, because none of us ever gets to that next level without somebody pushing from below or the side or above. If you saw my undergraduate transcript, you would know why this was a very funny statement to have made to me. But he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and put me, as I said, on a trajectory that I could not have imagined. It's time for lunch. I'll be back in this room. I hope 1 or 2 of you come back. I thank you for your time and attention.
Can you hear me? Wow, good job. You set up this afternoon very well. What I failed to do earlier when I introduced him was to tell you that he was the vice president of his 5th grade class also. I forgot to tell you that. Thank you, Dr. Koo. What wonderful information and wonderful direction. His work will be posted on our website later on, or this material here, so you can get it. I know you were writing frantically. That's what it's all about, correct? But without a doubt, you can access him this afternoon along with Joe Cusio and Dr. DeWitt. All of these folks will be working with you at whatever direction you want them to look at how to do high-impact practices and strategies, but do it with fidelity. Many of you may have a first-year program, but are you doing it with fidelity? Just having the programs by themselves doesn't mean a whole lot. You have to be able to do it with fidelity. We will go to lunch downstairs. Originally, when we conceived the idea of having round tables and having discussions at the table, we were thinking of 150 people. Obviously, that we have more. So find a table, sit and have lunch, come back, go to your respective sessions at 1:30. And that, by the way, I should also tell you, they will be repeated this afternoon. So enjoy lunch. It's downstairs in room E.